I got to give a shout out. There's someone in the media who deserves some respect, and people are not going to want to accept it, but we're people of principle. Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks, quote, "I was wrong. Young Turks Kasparian admits she bought into false Rittenhouse narrative." Mad respect. 100% respect.
Wow.
If you recognize that you're wrong and you correct it, I will give you the respect you deserve. Because if someone comes out and says, I bought into this false narrative on Kyle Rittenhouse, which is what Anna Kasparian did, and then we refuse to accept their acknowledgement, you only encourage them to keep doing bad. We tell them thank you for saying the right thing with respect, and hopefully they continue to do the right thing, do the research. And if they do, I'll give them the respect they deserve.
Well, that's big that she came out and corrected her statement, because if we remember, I mean, the mainstream media, especially MSNBC, they were calling Kyle a domestic terrorist, a mass murderer. They were using extremely hyperbolic language in order to kind of inflame this situation. There's people trying to make this about race. And again, this has nothing to do with any of that. But when it comes to this kind of salacious action, someone actually saying, hey, I was actually wrong here is very big, because the mainstream media doubled down, tripled down, and they're still trying to ignore a lot of important facts in this case. They didn't know what happened, but they still were able to declare definitely domestic terrorists, definitely a mass murderer. Again, we're still finding out all the details of the case here, and the picture portrayed here is totally different. Social media took people down for talking about facts of this case. So that's absolutely huge. People were prevented from having a discussion what was going on here. We only got mainstream media dribble and assertions, and then everyone else left talking about this was scared of being targeted and taken down. There's people demonetized. There's people who lost their channels. There's people who were eviscerated and deleted, unpersoned, because of even discussing the facts here.
The prosecution's case against Kyle Rittenhouse in the shooting of 3 individuals in Kenosha, Wisconsin, is not looking good. Now, of course, that shooting, which took place last year when he was 17 years old, resulted in 2 individuals dying, 1 individual being wounded. And the person who was shot and wounded did testify on the stand recently. His name is Gage Grosskreutz. And he admitted on the stand that he was, in fact, in possession of a firearm, which he had unholstered in response to Kyle Rittenhouse, because he believed that Kyle Rittenhouse was an active shooter. Now, this is an important detail in the trial, because the defense claims that Kyle Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense when he fired his weapon. I want to be clear that this moment between Grosskreutz and Rittenhouse happened after Rittenhouse had fatally shot Joseph Rosenbaum. That was an individual who was chasing after him into a parking lot. We covered that in more detail earlier on the show. But for now, let's focus on what happened in the aftermath following the shooting of Rosenbaum. This is where Gage Grosskreutz is involved, and he is about to explain why he unholstered his gun in this clip. Let's watch.
Today, the jury was shown new drone video of Rittenhouse shooting and killing Joseph Rosenbaum. A crowd chased and confronted Rittenhouse as he fled that scene. Then Rittenhouse shot and killed another protester before wounding Grosskreutz. Rittenhouse claims he was acting in self-defense. His attorney questioned Grosskreutz's actions leading to the shooting.
When you were standing 3 to 5 feet from him, it wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right? Correct.
Now, of course, in order to use the defense of self-defense in a court of law, you need to show that there was an imminent threat, right? And in this case, with Grosskreutz unholstering his weapon, you could argue, obviously, that Kyle Rittenhouse, who was on his back at the time, was dealing with an imminent threat. So Grosskreutz, 27, testified that he unholstered his gun on August 25th, 2020, as he and a crowd followed Rittenhouse, who had just fatally shot Joseph Rosenbaum. Rittenhouse fell to the ground, fired twice at an unknown person, and then fatally shot Anthony Huber. That was the second individual that he fatally shot. Grosskreutz, just feet away, put his hands in the air, videos show. He then saw Rittenhouse re-rack his weapon, a motion that loads it for gunfire. He testified, so that's what he claimed. He said this: re-racking the weapon, in my mind, meant that the defendant pulled the trigger while my hands were in the air, but the gun didn't fire. So by re-racking the weapon, I inferred the defendant wasn't accepting my surrender. On redirect, though, he clarified that he did not intentionally aim at Rittenhouse. At any point during the encounter, did you intentionally point your firearm at the defendant? Prosecutor Thomas Binger asked. No, I did not, he responded. But clearly you can see in this still shot from the video, it's a little blurry, but you can see that's Grosskreutz with the gun pointed at Kyle Rittenhouse just before Rittenhouse had shot his weapon. Yeah, to me, the thing that's standing out the most about this case, not necessarily the trial of Rittenhouse, but the entire situation that unfolded that night, was the lack of trust in police authorities to do their jobs appropriately. Because the militia members who showed up armed, regardless of what you think of them, felt that they needed to be there to protect the community and to protect local businesses. I agree that showing up puts yourself in a dangerous position, and Rittenhouse as a 17-year-old, really, I mean, I get it. He previously had worked in that community, supposedly as a lifeguard. I'll take that at face value, but we are not supposed to allow vigilantes to just like rush in and carry out or enforce what they believe to be the law, right? We're supposed to rely on our police, on police authorities, law enforcement to do their jobs. But whether you're on the right or the left in this particular case, no one trusted the cops to do their jobs. I mean, you watch testimony, you watch video of these militia members, and they're just like, yeah, we just saw communities burn down and we felt like we needed to go in and control the situation. It just creates a dangerous environment. And one other thing that's also clear to me based on reporting that's come out ever since the situation transpired is that the cops like intentionally grouped, like they pushed both groups together, like in one area, knowing that that could lead to an increase of violence, it could lead to a violent situation. And that's exactly what happened here. I do have some details on that I think are relevant as well. And it does have to do with Grosskreutz, the third person who was shot that testified. You saw the video earlier. We're also learning that he was carrying, and by the way, Cenk referenced that there were paramedics there. Grosskreutz was there because he's a paramedic and he claimed he was there to help anyone who might be injured. He had a weapon, but it wasn't licensed for concealed carry. Grosskreutz also acknowledged that he incorrectly told police last year that his firearm had fallen out of his pants that night and did not admit that he had a weapon at the time. He also said that he had only minimal information about Rittenhouse or his prior actions at the time of the shooting. And yes, he had a weapon with him for protection, but he did not have a license for concealed carry because that license had already expired. So you have two sides, obviously an incredibly hostile situation. You have cops that are, in my opinion, stoking the flames of that hostile situation, and both sides are armed. And it's a recipe for disaster. And then you add the Rosenbaum part of it. He was someone who was just released from a mental health institution. He was clearly not in the right frame of mind. And honestly, his behavior is what really sparked the shootings to take place, right? We have so many issues in this country, and what you had in that night was a dangerous cocktail of many of those issues simultaneously.
Deep breath now.
Kyle Rittenhouse testified in the homicide trial against him, something that was unexpected considering usually those who stand trial do not take the stand unless the defense believes that it will help their case. Now, here it's clear that the defense thought that Kyle Rittenhouse taking the stand will help his case. And before we get to the moment that you just saw in more context, there were many notable moments from the trial today that I wanted to share with all of you, including this moment in regard to the weapon that Kyle Rittenhouse had, the weapon that he used to shoot individuals, 2 of whom died, 1 of whom was wounded. Now, under cross-examination, Rittenhouse did acknowledge that it was illegal for him to carry an AR-15 rifle that was used in the shootings. So for me, the only thing that's an open and closed or open and shut case is the charge regarding his illegal weapon. He has already admitted on the stand that he was in possession of one. That charge, by the way, is a misdemeanor. So it's not nearly as serious as the other charges that he's facing.
In the meantime, tonight, the Kyle Rittenhouse trial continued today in Wisconsin in a move that surprised lawyers everywhere. Rittenhouse took the stand in his own defense. That is unusual in criminal cases, and it's especially unusual in murder trials. And the reason is simple: the stakes are too high. One wrong answer in a cross-examination, and you could wind up spending life in prison. But this case was different. By the time he testified today, Kyle Rittenhouse had already won the case. At this point, there was no remaining doubt that Kyle Rittenhouse acted in self-defense during the riots last summer in Kenosha. Every shot Rittenhouse fired was captured on videotape and from multiple angles. Every single witness who testified this week at the trial confirmed exactly what happened. And here are the facts of it. A convicted child rapist called Joseph Rosenbaum was released from a mental hospital and then went directly to join the mob that was burning downtown Kenosha. Once he got to the riot, Rosenbaum saw Kyle Rittenhouse and immediately threatened to kill him. Rosenbaum then chased Rittenhouse and tried to pull the gun from his hands. When he did that, Kyle Rittenhouse shot him. So Joseph Rosenbaum died as he had lived, trying to touch an unwilling minor. At this point, Rittenhouse ran to find police. A mob then chased him down the street, howling for his death. A rioter jumped on Rittenhouse and knocked him to the ground. Another smashed him in the face with a skateboard. Yet another drew a loaded gun and pointed it in his face. Kyle Rittenhouse shot the second 2 men, one of them fatally. So those are the facts, and there's no way to interpret them except for what they are, the exercise of self-defense. Kyle Rittenhouse shot people so he would not be killed. But if you take a step back from the Rittenhouse story, you see something else entirely. You see violent insanity completely out of control in the middle of an American city. And the question is, how did that happen in our country? And why did nobody stop it? And it wasn't just happening in Kenosha, of course. Violent mobs at the same moment overwhelmed New York and Minneapolis and Portland and many other cities. They killed at least a dozen people. They caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. They burned businesses, they torched police stations, they bombed courthouses, they invaded suburban neighborhoods in the middle of the night purely to intimidate people because of their race. Democrats applauded all of this as it happened. Most Republicans just ignored it, and of course the media lied about it. In Kenosha, the police barely even showed up. Officers in armored cruisers sat and watched as rioters torched a car lot with more than 100 vehicles in it, and they did nothing to stop the chaos. The question then is, how exactly are we surprised when a 17-year-old lifeguard from Illinois decides to step in? They hate it when you say that, but it's an entirely fair question. When legitimate authority refuses to do its duty, its sworn duty, others will fill the vacuum. That is always true. It's a physics principle. But rather than acknowledge that obvious truth and accept the responsibility they bear, the people who made these riots possible in the first place decided instead to crush Kyle Rittenhouse. Joe Biden publicly called him a white supremacist, something for which someday we very much hope he is sued, because it's totally outrageous and false. Members of Congress called him a domestic terrorist. Today, Kyle Rittenhouse spoke for himself. See what you think.
Once I take that step back, I look over my shoulder and Mr. Rosenbaum was now running from my right side. And I was cornered from in front of me with Mr. Zeminski, and there were there were 3 people right there.
Take a deep breath, Kyle.
So after a 10-minute break to compose himself, Kyle Rittenhouse returned to the courtroom and proceeded to blow up the prosecution's claim that he had racked his rifle in a threatening manner. It turns out he didn't rack his rifle at all, and video proved that. And then Rittenhouse explained why he turned himself in to police after the shootings.
People were saying, cranium him, get him, kill him. people were screaming, and I just was trying to get to the police running down Sheridan Road.
And you say, I'm trying to get to the police. Why were you trying to get to the police?
So I didn't do anything wrong. I defended myself.
Did you feel as though there was safety where the police were?
Yes.
So they didn't really have a response to that since it's all on videotape. It's provably true. So instead, the lead prosecutor in the case, in today's case, who is essentially an NPR pledge drive donor called Thomas Binger, took a very different tack. He went on to imply that Kyle Rittenhouse must be guilty because he had exercised his constitutional right to remain silent after he was arrested. Watch.
Since August 25th, 2020, this is the first time that you have told your story.
Sustained.
Since August 25th, 2020, you've had the benefit of watching countless videos of your actions that night, correct? You've also had the opportunity to listen to the testimony of all 30-some witnesses that have testified in this trial so far, correct?
Yes.
And after all of that, now you are telling us your side of the story, correct?
Correct.
I am making the point that after hearing everything in the case, now he's tailoring his story to what has already been introduced.
The problem is, this is a grave constitutional violation for you to talk about the defendant's silence. And that is, and you're right on the borderline, and you may be over, but it better stop.
Understood.
Yeah, this is day one of law school stuff, but just to be clear, exercising your constitutional rights is not an indication that you are guilty. It is a sign that you are American. It is your birthright. The government's own lawyer does not understand that, which you think might get the attention of Merrick Garland's Justice Department, which after all is in charge of justice in this country. But no, Merrick Garland is not interested, just as he has ignored the thugs videotaping jurors outside the courthouse. The judge in this case seems pretty well fed up with all of it. Today he ruled that prosecutors could not mention statements about shoplifters that Kyle Rittenhouse apparently made weeks before the shootings. Prosecutors asked Rittenhouse about them anyway, and once again the judge was forced to shut down the trial.
I indicated a bias towards denial is what I did. Held it open with a bias towards denial. Why would you think that that made it okay for you, without any advance notice, to bring this matter before the jury? I was astonished when you began your examination by commenting on the defendant's post-arrest silence. That's basic law. It's been basic law in this country for 40 years, 50 years. I have no idea why you would do something like that. And it gives, well, I'll leave it at that. So I don't know what you're up to.
You can watch televised trials for the next 10 years and never hear a judge talk like that. That's how completely out of control the prosecution in this case is. At this point, it's not even clear it's going to make it to a jury. The defense has asked the judge to dismiss the case without the possibility of retrial, and the judge indicated he might very well grant that request. So again, what you are watching is willful prosecutorial misconduct. It's an intentional perversion of justice, and the judge very well knows that.
I had heard nothing in this trial to change any of my rulings. So why?
Testimony, Your Honor.
Pardon me?
That was before the defense testimony.
Don't get brazen with me. You knew very well. You know very well that an attorney can't go into these types of areas when the judge has already ruled without asking outside the presence of the jury to do so. So don't give me that.
Yeah, don't give me that. Exactly. Good for the judge. We should tell you, we're so used to evaluating everything through a partisan lens that it's worth knowing the judge in this case, that guy, was appointed by a Democrat. The point is, however, he still believes in the Constitution. That's always the point. Kyle Rittenhouse should be very grateful he's the judge in this case. Yesterday, the prosecutor tried to bully a freelance photographer called Nathan DeBruin. In return, that turned out to be a mistake. DeBruin ratted him out on live television. Watch this.
Mr. DeBruin, you said there was a lot of tension in the room when you met with me and Mr. Binger and Ms. Beasy.
Yes.
Is it fair to say that you were very nervous?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we did have you read over your statement, right?
Correct.
And we asked if you knew anything beyond that statement.
Correct.
We didn't ask you to change it.
Yes, you did.
Yes, you did. So pressuring a witness to change his statement. Right. That's exactly the kind of justice that Kyle Rittenhouse has received from the government so far. No one who's been paying attention is surprised by any of this. Ghouls like Joe Biden politicized this case day one. What's terrifying and very unnerving to anyone who lives in this country is the number of institutions that joined the Democratic Party in trying to prevent Kyle Rittenhouse from getting a fair trial, which again is your birthright as an American. Here's one example. In Virginia, a police lieutenant called William Kelly was fired from his job for daring to donate to Kyle Rittenhouse's legal defense. Kelly was a 20-year veteran of the Norfolk Police Department. He had 3 children and a wife with cancer. For disagreeing with Joe Biden's view of the Rittenhouse case, the department dismissed him without a pension. That actually happened. In Salt Lake City, a local news station decided to terrorize a paramedic called Craig Shepard. His sin, giving $10 to Rittenhouse's legal defense. So reporters called Shepard's employer. Another reporter showed up at Shepard's house with a camera crew and then bragged about it. Quote, ABC 4 News investigator Jason Wynn went to Shepard's home to get his side of things, but those inside the home didn't want to talk. Yeah, wonder why. It is shameful and authoritarian, hurting the weak to appease the strong. That's the American media 2021. Having watched the trial, no honest person could fail to admit the obvious. The media were completely wrong about Kyle Rittenhouse. They slandered an innocent kid, but they're not admitting it. There is at least one exception, though, and we want to highlight that person tonight. Her name is Anna Kasparian. She's a lefty. She's on a show called The Young Turk. She hates this show, and most of the time we disagree with her. But on the question of this trial, Anna Kasparian was bravely honest, and good for her. Watch this.
So look, these details matter because if you're going to make an argument that you acted in self-defense, there needs to be some proof that there was an imminent threat. Now, what really mattered to me was how all of this unfolded. What was the thing that sparked it? What started all of it? And initially, I was under the assumption that Rittenhouse was the person who was chasing after Joseph Rosenbaum, that's how it had started. But I was wrong about that. Okay, so I want to correct the record. I was, in fact, wrong about that.
Wow, you don't see that too often, but it's not hard, by the way. Tell the truth. Let reality be your guide. It feels good. That's what decent people do. There are too few of them.
Kenosha residents better get their fire extinguishers ready because when Kyle Rittenhouse is found and not guilty, the Black Lives Matter and Antifa terrorists are going to be so upset they're probably going to return downtown to try to finish their mission of burning the city to the ground. Almost everything that's come out during the trial had already been known to those of us who followed this case from the night of the incident. We knew it that night or the very next day. That Kyle didn't travel across state lines. It's the community next door. His dad lives in Kenosha. He worked in Kenosha. He was there cleaning graffiti off of the high school because he's a Boy Scout earlier that day. He didn't come there with a mission to try to kill people. He went there to try to help render aid to the protesters. He did render aid to the protesters. If you've been watching my channel, if you saw my previous video, The Truth About Kyle Rittenhouse, I laid this all out over a year ago, but Facebook started censoring posts. Any video or post that literally showed Kyle Rittenhouse acted in self-defense was a violation of Facebook's terms of service. The night of the incident, we had the video showing Joseph Rosenbaum, the psychotic convicted pedophile, chasing down Kyle and trying to take his gun before getting shot, as well as the video showing the guy hitting him with the skateboard and Gage Grosskreutz coming up to him and pointing his gun at him before he got shot in the bicep. We already had all of the evidence. A guy in his kitchen and his laptop, or anybody who followed this case closely, had already put the pieces of the puzzle together that night or the very next day. But here's how the mainstream media portrayed what happened.
Kenosha shooter, Kyle Rittenhouse, he murdered 2 people, by the way.
Rittenhouse is basically what you would have had any school shooter. He's a 17-year-old kid. He shouldn't have had a gun. He crossed state lines to supposedly protect property. No, he was going out to shoot people.
Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old vigilante.
Kyle Rittenhouse, the vigilante. Kyle Rittenhouse, the armed teenage vigilante.
A 17-year-old vigilante, arguably a domestic terrorist, picked up a rifle, drove to a different state to shoot people.
Kyle Rittenhouse, a guy who's deeply racist, went with weapons to a Black Lives Matter protest looking to get in trouble. He did. He murdered a couple of people.
Rittenhouse 17-year-old kid just running around, shooting and killing protesters.
You see the 17-year-old who was radicalized by Trumpism, took his AR-15 to Kenosha and became a killer.
A white, Trump-supporting, MAGA-loving, Blue Lives Matter social media partisan, 17 years old, picks up a gun, drives from one state to another with the intent to shoot people.
These people aren't just spreading fake news or lies. These are servants of Satan. The American people are supposed to be able to trust brand name news networks for accurate information and analysis. But all they do is spread pure lies and propaganda straight from the pit of hell.
Remember, the publicity surrounding this trial, there was a lot of a sympathetic media towards him. People who thought about him as essentially a bit of a martyr from this inflection point on racial tension in America. The idea of the amount of sort of GoFundMe-esque aids that came to his assistance.
Favorable coverage. Well, if that's favorable, I'd hate to see what happens when somebody gets on their bad side. Of course, Kyle bravely took the stand in his own defense, giving some very compelling and emotional testimony, perfectly fitting in with all the evidence. Someone else who took the stand, but committed perjury, although he'll never get charged for it, is Gage Grosskreutz' friend and roommate. After visiting his friend in the hospital, the guy who pulled his gun on Kyle Rittenhouse and got shot in the arm, he posted on social media saying that Gage told him that he wishes that he would have shot Kyle Rittenhouse before Kyle shot him. But when he was asked about this post, he said this.
He didn't say that to you?
He never said that to me.
You just posted something about your friend, your roommate, that was a lie?
I did.
This post right here is you equating something that Mr. Grosskreutz said to you.
I lied. He never said that. Those words have never came out of his mouth.
Of course, he's got to cover for his friend because if they admit that he planned on shooting Kyle Rittenhouse, then that'll just bolster Kyle's self-defense case, not to mention cause any lawsuits that I'm sure that they'll plan to file against Kyle to be thrown out. We did learn a few things during the trial, however. Joseph Rosenbaum, the poor man's Jeffrey Epstein, who chased down Kyle and tried to take his gun before getting shot, had threatened Kyle and another man earlier in the evening, saying that if he finds them later, that he's going to kill them. And he was brandishing a weapon earlier in the night, picking up a chain and swinging it around, threatening people. In fact, most of the witnesses the prosecution called accidentally ended up giving evidence for the defense before they even started putting on their case. And here's just a small sample of this clown show with the prosecutor, who is the assistant district attorney.
You, at some point as you get close to the 63rd Street car source, start running towards that lot, right?
Towards the fire that in the Duramax.
And Mr. Rosenbaum is running ahead of you, isn't he?
I don't believe so.
But you decided you needed to run because of the fire on the Duramax?
Yes.
Why? What was so urgent?
It was a fire.
Why did you feel that you should go around off the 59th Street car source property and put out fires?
To make sure my community didn't get burnt down and help.
And when you say your community, you mean Kenosha?
Yes.
Again, you're from Antioch. You're not living in Kenosha at this time when this all happens, right?
My dad lives in Kenosha.
And a friend of George Floyd's posted a video online saying that he knew of people who were in Kenosha to dox the jurors, to get their names, addresses, and take their photographs in order to intimidate them into declaring Kyle guilty. And then, what a surprise, somebody was discovered to have been stalking the jurors and was taking photos or videos of them, and police officers had to intervene to try to protect their anonymity. And remember, virtually every brand name social media personality and member of Congress were afraid to defend Kyle Rittenhouse until just a few days ago. And they wouldn't even denounce Facebook for censoring any posts showing that he acted in self-defense. Now they're all a bunch of Johnny-come-latelys, but never forget, they wouldn't speak out when it mattered most, even when all the evidence was clear and when Facebook was banning anybody who tried to post that evidence.